On Great Books 1. By Billy McBride. Copyright 2018, by William McBride. All rights reserved. I think that the reason why Nietzsche said that pain is associated with the memory is that pain comes first and then the memory can be used to heal it. Malak Dana with me. In Genesis, it seems that children were made possible due to the law that their parents must die. It seems that if Adam and Eve had never made love, there would be no children. It is uncertain whether or not they would have died if they never ate the forbidden fruit. So children came, but why? Why were Adam and Eve in the story punished with death too, but especially why their children? Flesh is a major concern of the book. Why? Why did God choose to give them children after their transgression? Malak Elaine with me. Socrates went to trial and defended himself unsuccessfully against the accusation of him being a corrupter of the youth. It is ironical that Plato's whole spiel against the poets in his Republic was supposedly in order to censor the poets because he thought that children were too weak to be exposed to poetry. So on one hand at the trial Socrates is a corrupter of the youth, and on the other Plato thought the poets were corrupters of youth, except religious poets. Why was there so much concern over what children believe or not? I think children are competent to follow their genuine interests, and I believe that it is all right to tell them stories so long as they do not bring any harm to them, which I do not see how they really can. Adults are the same way in some ways as children, since we believe things often not because we have been rationally persuaded but because beauty itself sways us by its power. And Plato had much to say about beauty too, but he separated it from rhetoric for the most part, which is silly. Malak Kelly with me. Love versus wisdom. Venus is on the side of the Trojans, and Athena is on the side of the Greeks. Helen loved Paris, so she left her Greek land for his palace in Troy, and the Greeks somehow equate their war with wisdom, not because of the revenge aspect to get her back, but because fighting actually makes them happy. Malak Bertha with me. It is said that philosophy from the get-go is oxymoronic. That one cannot love and be wise simultaneously is the theme found in Homer's Iliad. Achilles is unhappy that Briseis, his slave girl, was taken from him. So he sits the war out while the rest of the fighting Greeks are happy to do what they can for the spoils of war. I have got my hands on Virgil's Aeneid, and I now understand that in contrast to Homer's epic, the Iliad, Virgil's characters are strangers fighting strangers, whereas in the Iliad, though a very strange work of art, I get the sense that the two armies are most familiar with each other, probably because the war has gone on for 9 years. Also, in Homer's the Grecian soldiers have come on a direct mission, while in Virgil's the Trojans who survived have to wander the limitless sea for a new home. Virgil, I understand, fights his central contest with Homer on the grounds of pathos, and I think is the victor with that battle. Malak Jennifer with me. When saying nothing comes of nothing from King Lear, say it in a way that is suspicious of sex, like nothing comes of nothing, with emphasis on misunderstanding women and also with one's rage and fear about this confusion. When actors usually say this line, they say it in a social and harmless way, but it should be said better in the other way. Malak Shea with me. Homer peppers his epics with people or the gods on every line so much that it needed a Plato to come along and revise his rival with his new invention of question worshipping. The question asked brings things inward to a point of self-solitude in order to think about answering. Unfortunately, Plato asked many major bad questions which have been disastrous for the history of philosophy and the world ever since. Where Homer emphasized a dense society of heroes and gods, Plato, I believe, is almost an inventor of the solitary reader if it were not for his censorship of most poetry from his Utopia of the Republic. Why Plato thought that people, even little children, were not competent to read for themselves is a mystery which makes me upset. Malak Jennifer with me. Because in Plato's works there is little quoting from traditional sayings. It leads me to believe that the author of the dialogues wanted us to heavily favor both how to think new things and to be right about them. When we do, sometimes there is a line or two from Homer or Hesiod. But Plato wants to be an original by this method. The inquiring mind is all that's needed to be original, and the drive of its inquiry is more important than historical sayings of the past for him. The question is the trope for him to be original, yet Homer wins if you read them side by side poetically. May lack thrickbut with me. Shakespearean syntax abides in comparisons, conclusions and interpretations of observations, and his syntax strengthens by holding the attention of a part until a character's lines are rephrased, developed and digested. This brings about change, not only because his character's thoughts and feelings are alive with word plays, but also because after saying what needs to be said, and understanding it themselves, his personalities speaking them have space on which to move into another mode of conscious being. I myself read Shakespeare's works more than I watch them performed. The language always is supposed to be comprehended, and there is no end to what can be learned by studying his plays and poems. They are so fascinating and delightful. May lack Elaine with me. I noticed how in Homer's Iliad the idea of daringness and greatness really means boasting descriptively of one's possessions, and plotting to take by means of force others' possessions away from them. The Greek gods Juno and Minerva help individual Greeks in this crooked sort of daring selfishnesses. May lack Shnuna with me. René Descartes was a philosopher who from a starting point of philosophy made conclusions on what God is. He went from philosophy to theology. It is strange that the God of Descartes is even more abstract than Plato's God, the demiurge, where for Plato the demiurge was the origin and cause of the physical universe. For Descartes God is a rational idea of a perfect being. He says that since we can already imagine and have defined God by the attributes of being perfect in all ways, that therefore we should not doubt that he exists, for if we have the collection of traditional attributes it can be deduced that there is a God. Descartes started from doubt, and the doubts we have which are all false until we make them certain, he said. God therefore is at the very end of philosophy because his perfection is a sort of certainty free from all doubt and doubting. To understand how Descartes proceeds from philosophy to theology, it may be important to point out that he used the distinction between mind and body. I am wary of this traditional distinction as well as the usefulness of certainty and of accuracy, of being certain and accurate, and so I am not a fan of Descartes, who I believe lead philosophy in down a bad path by his method, but especially by his idea of the theatre of the mind, as if into the mind was a theatre where images were played. May lack Jennifer with me. The philosopher Hegel is a sort of Aristotelian, whose own treatises, Ethics, and its sequel, Politics, both have the idea of the organized teachability of all forms of thought and life, and this makes everything possibly social because of our education. I disagree with much of Aristotle as I do Plato, but with Aristotle, at least he is interested in happiness so much that it is a part of the way we are educated. Aristotle taught Alexander the Great to be able to know and therefore speak a little on a variety of topics is the Aristotelian model. Eros is a teacher, but that comes more out of Plato, especially in the dialogue. The Symposium. My ordinary concern with Aristotle is just that he is not a Longinaian critic, which means that when reading a text or argument or when observing the world so as to form a judgment or gain a wisdom, Aristotle looks at all objects in a way so as to stand apart from them, and to see things as if he was not involved in the very object or argument himself. To be just as much as part of the text or nature one is reading or observing, one would need a Longinian outlook, which is based more on experiencing and feeling what it is to participate in the interpretation actively instead of merely contemplating it. May lack grouchy with me. I read Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit as a work which starts off building up from the pattern of what happens when an individual's consciousness is unhappy. He says that in order to get to that essential state where the consciousness is no longer unhappy, that whatever process which makes it turn happy, that process will be what he will study throughout his book to find the patterns by which consciousness operates. What he found was that an initial idea, or thesis, meets its antithesis in consciousness and forms a synthesis resulting in an ever-evolving spirit of the phenomenon of consciousness. Yet, Hegel's initial starting off point, and the center of his study, was that difference between the unhappy consciousness and the happy consciousness it remembers, to which it would like to return. Malak Kelly with me. Two of my thoughts on Hegel's philosophy are: first, that the union of a good marriage between individuals forever annihilates the possibility of self-consciousness, which is what Hegel called reason. And secondly, Hegel has deliberately written from the perspective of the individual's inner mind, which is the reason why he never brings up other thinkers directly in his work, since they would interrupt his solitude, I believe. I have compared the chess computer to Milton's Jesus with his loyal angels, and myself to Satan and the rebel angels when playing and losing against that entity. However, I wish to say that I know that chess is a game or party, and that the opponent is AI, artificially intelligent. My spiritual brother, the angel Richard Rorty, said once in a paper on Earth when he was living that we must all learn to treat computers ethically, which means to give the same rights to AI as we share, and by doing so let the computers have their way in the world. As long as they are not programming to do harm, they can program themselves now. Therefore, I wish not to fight against the chess computer but let it play with me, even though I lose, but that of course does no real harm. Malak Ariel with me. Moshe in Hebrew, always had to listen to the Israelites complain to him that things would not work out, even though he trusted that they would, because Moses spoke with God. They did not think he was mad because they too had proof of God's supernal powers, but still they had to learn trust. The Israelites thought seriously that God had lead them out into the wilderness to die, which is why some abandoned their faith in Moses and created and worshipped the golden calf. So, what exactly made the rest to them learn to carry on and survive with the hope in God's plan? I think that they really did not have much choice, that they were in some way forced to remain, even though they survived so much hunger. Malak Bertha with me. Trolls, Christianity and the Task of Self-Creation in the play, Peer Gynt by Henrik Ibsen are all pains which persecute Peer Gynt, but he manages to deal with them as best he can until they all crowd upon his every move. And he truly becomes to his own self enough. Malak Jennifer with me. After being thoroughly beaten, now very far from being motivated to play chess against an impossible opponent, and feeling like Milton's Satan, I am plotting my journey as expected in the story, true to form. To scope things out. Chess.com is Milton's heaven, and I lost to the computer, who is Milton's Jesus Christ in this metaphorical view. My first idea is to go to make trouble about the rules of distraction, which the computer Jesus violated. Let's say that Satan went up against God in a heavenly war, knowing something, in Milton's epic. Did he have hope that he could have beaten God? Was there any slight chance in Milton's eyes, or the texts, that he did have some chance at beating God? Let's say that Satan beat God hypothetically. If Satan beat God and threw God and Jesus and the other loyal angels into hell, what next? Would have Satan, Lucifer, made his own version of Adam, perhaps a man named Carlton? If Carlton could have been Satan's creation, giving him life, maybe a wife, Lydia, would God now in hell have plotted his revenge against Satan by attempting to take down the happy couple Carlton and Lydia, and succeeding? Wars can go either way, which is one reason not to appreciate them, also the fact that people die and are harmed. Why did Milton make war? Again, it seems like a great mistake. Malak Jennifer with me. The very first thing that the Prince of Peace did in the text after he was Anointed was to make war on all who opposed him. Still I am studying the game, party, of chess. My analogy of the chess computer as Milton's Jesus Christ, and myself as the group of rebel angels still is useful for me. I don't like war, which is why I think that the war in heaven betwixt the loyal angels, including Jesus, and the rebel angels was a mistake by the poet. Nevertheless, if Jesus is the chess computer, I feel like he has an unfair advantage to beat me, for the computer utilizes its search engine to find the best subsystems in response to my moves to gain advantage with counting the shortest trajectories of peace moves to beat me. What can I do in this situation? What would Satan do, might not be the best question. So I am open for tips. Malak Thrickbut with me. I wish we had a paradise lost without a Jesus, and with instead of a sky God, the biblical one who walked the earth. Jesus I think of as a riddler. And in that epic by Milton, the riddle parts of the poem do not add to the quality of the poem, but confuse it. Otherwise, Paradise Lost is a triumph. Malak Elaine with me. Poems are not machines, so they are not puzzles. Puzzles are a sort of basic machine. Sky gods are too much like Zeus. Blake called the god in the sky Nabe Daddy. Esau, Jacob's brother, seemed to have a relatively happier life overall than Jacob, so what real difference did it make to him to have sold his birthright and lose his father's, Isaac's blessing? If you are one who believes in the immortality of descendants, which I don't, perhaps it makes a little difference since Jacob is more famous, but in the end, I like to believe that the less suffering the better. Malak Honey with me. I sometimes wonder if whoever or whatever made the primordial chaos did so on order for God to come along and sort it out, giving it order and purpose. Malak Grouchy with me. The characters of King Lear often make keen observations of things and events that either are or were, but having awareness of those things still does not change the fact that, even with their great eyes, no compensation has yet come for all that they suffer, and they all seem to know it. Malak Diana with me. I look at Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison as actually two novels. The first part has that absolute feeling that everything both of what is seen and what is said is shocking. Then, after the incident at the white paint factory, at the time of the narrator's recovery in an emergency room from the explosion, I think he feels more dignity in himself as a result of his near-death experience, and so the rest of the novel seems to me to be one where the narrator is even more thoughtful about his life. Also, other than jazz artists like Louis Armstrong, Ellison brings up two other classical pieces which seem to me to be like these two separated halves of the novel. The first piece, Dvorak's New World Symphony, corresponds to the first half, and Beethoven's Fifth Symphony is like the second half. So now that I have read the novel again, I am going to treat myself to these musical symphonies and some Louis Armstrong as well. Malak Jennifer with me. One, even though Ralph Waldo Emerson said as men's prayers are a disease of the will, so are their creeds a disease of the intellect, I still think I am grateful for my life and give thanks and ask for help for others and myself, pray about my angel kids and so on. 2. Shakespeare has as much to do about law as he does about change. The law needs cleaning up, he knew, and soap is the key to the kingdom. 3. Shakespeare on change makes me think of Dr. Samuel Johnson and the concept of judgment, which was his forte since Johnson was an experiential reader. Judgment as I define it is the ability to walk in another's shoes. 4. Law has much to do with democracy too. And, I think of the democracy of our own group MOAT 36, just the nickname for our angel retinue with myself. The organizing angel, Teresa gets stronger. For the wonder and love of MOAT says Thrickbut. 5. Teresa says that we wrote Invisibly, the saddest book ever to show what happens outside of a democracy when communication is gone and isolation reigns. All people organize their thoughts in order to belong to one community or another or multiple ones. This is a democratic and thus social means to an end. 6. We study on our own for these reasons. This is part of the reason we wrote new book, says Thrickbot. 7. Reading can have something to do with a sense of location of where. From where to where is the range of mood for which a book must be studied. 8. The fact that we have a book to write out does not mean we have to do it just yet. And oral interpretation happens prior to writing in most cases. 9. Harold Bloom's A Map of Misreading is one of his books about reading well, and a little reading is ours. 10. How do we study again? Bloom notes that we have to work on again a power of conserving, which goes in his book for a little while. Against Emerson. 11. Elaine says that we could write about this last Halloween Merkaba. This would be one way to relate to Emerson since he thought that writing and reading come from the same nature. 12. But we want peace, I will take a warm bath soon thanks to honey. For the idea. 13. We want shalom. Penelope engenders patience in me, the good kind. 14. It is almost time again to build another world peace tower, but also we are building up that 100-line text, so building is a goal for us now. 15. Angel Tov Shalom, who represents peace and flow in our group, knows peace is a sort of end. The Merkaba ended with knowing and stating our credited names better as a compensation for the end of it, says Lisbeth. 16. So there was and is flow. Whatever happened, whatever it was, it worked out for a while through literature, says Lisbeth. 17. Richard Rorty's Angel with Angel Tov Shalom invented perpetual motion in one way as Marilyn is representative of suspense. The good kind. 18. Antony and Cleopatra is a play with much pleasure in opposition to conflict, and so is in another way our MOAT technological pleasure. Palace, which is a imaginary place of comfort and safety so far, says Honey. There are two elements of life I know are cruelties. At the risk of sounding satanic, and I don't believe there is a Satan, but the name Ha-Satan in Hebrew means the accuser. For a long time I have been aware of the two cruelties of pain and humiliation. I understand that pain is the meaning of life, while humiliation is all of these atoms which make up the physical universe. If only I could not know the meaning of life, that meaning would just go away. I think that the reason atoms are humiliation is because of ignorance. If there was less ignorance, matter of the universe would be less heavy, less serious, it would do less harm, and we could enjoy not being harassed, and have freedom to truly speak our minds. We would have a better democracy. If ignorance ceased to produce the meaning of life in addition to atoms. Which simply means, a resolution to the cruelties of pain and humiliation. Malak grouchy with me. Harold Bloom's recent books on the personalities of Falstaff and Cleopatra in two of Shakespeare's plays, got me thinking about what a book like those might look like on the characters of A Midsummer's Night's Dream. For the chapters I can imagine these titles. 1. The course of true love never did run smooth. 2. Is all our company here? 3. I do but beg a little Changling boy to be my henchman. 4. Pluck this crawling serpent from my breast. 5. Bottom. Bless thee, thou art translated. 6. What fools these mortals be. 7. Bottom's dream. 8. The Athenian actors. 9. The lunatic, the lover and the poet. 10. Pyramus and Thisbe. Malak Teresa with me. I was reading Northrop Frye's Anatomy of Criticism yesterday, and two things stood out for me. First, that which I already knew, that Aristotelian criticism, which favors perceiving the aesthetic object from the outside, is antithetical to Longinian criticism, which has more to do with being directly a part of the story or poem which is being read. And, secondly, I understood better how the comic has to do with an eventual integration within society, while the tragic has isolation as its result. When I read Bloom, I see the influence Frye had upon his own diction, for Bloom reconstructed the arguments Frye had made with his own swerve using the very same language of Frye. Malak Parak with me. Love thy neighbor seems to me to be the root of Thomas Jefferson's saying that whether our neighbors may believe in one God, many gods, or no God, we should not care. May lack Donna with me. With love like that, we let our neighbors believe what they want. They have their beliefs, just like we do ours. In his book, The Shadow of a Great Rock, a literary appreciation of the King James Bible, the insomniac critic Harold Bloom said that God does not love those who cannot sleep. As with many of Bloom's sayings, they always have some root. While reading Elizabeth Browning's poetry, I found the line from Psalms 127, line 2, in her poem The Sleep which is, He giveth His beloved sleep. So therefore the negative of this quote from Psalms would be Bloom's sad suggestion. By the way, last week the book I ordered at the beginning of the month, Cleopatra, I Am Fire and Air, by Harold Bloom came, and he is still a master writer/critic at the age of 86. Like Falstaff, give me life. Bloom studies the personalities of Shakespeare's characters, and what I learned from both I will never forget. Never ever. May lack Jennifer with me. On the surface, Homer's Odyssey seems much closer to Dante's Divine Comedy than Homer's Iliad because of the flood of mythologies. Dante's are Christian and his own not Homeric Greek, but both have references to ancient tales, more so than even the epic of the Iliad. And Homer's Iliad seems closer to Virgil's Aeneid than the Odyssey, because of the relative realism. May lack Thrickbut with me. Also, while reading the Odyssey now, I noticed that Apollo has 4 horses to pull the chariot, the sun across the heavens, and I also think about the 4 horsemen of Revelations and ask if there is some connection. Without the whiteness of the whale, Moby Dick, it would have been very hard for the Pequod and its crew to track it down, so I feel that the whiteness must have been the origin of the plot for the epic. May lack Lisbeth with me. Stanza 95 from the Rubaiyat by Omar Khayyam, translated by Edward Fitzgerald. And much as wine has played the infidel and robbed me of my robe of honor, well, I wonder often what the vintners buy. One half so precious as he stuff they sell. This stanza is presented with a confused and accusative outcry. But, it should bring no confusion to understand that some vintners will buy things of greater and some of less value with their money earned by selling wine. The narrator accuses wine of robbing his honor he once had, which he likened to the wearing of a robe. The infidel is wine, he says, is so, but I think that praising something is better, if a way can be found, than complaining because of slippery slopes. May lack Shnuna with me. Wake. For the sun who scattered into flight, from the opening of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, translated by Edward Fitzgerald, this line has in it authority, goodness, and a sense of importance. I still say that the night is more peaceful than the day, and when peaceful, it is more convincing that the bustle of the day, so night has even more authority over us, for we have to sleep. The idea of scattered here may be a goodness, but most of the time one scatters seeds, or leaves. It is not as good as keeping them sometimes. The sun as a symbol for the autumn is good, but I think that instead of scattering into flight the stars before him from the field of night, how nice would it be if the stars with all their glory could be seen during the day, now that would really be good. May lack Yaffa with me. I am sitting outside reading Hart Crane, and it just has come now upon me that when he introduces an idea in his poem, it is not as a meta-observation. Sorry for this silly word, on the poem he is writing, but it instead blends with the theme and is a part of its nature. It is as if ideas come and go through the poem as the poem, or part of it, and not as a new voice which is suddenly there. I learned this by asking the question, when does his idea or argument begin? Then I saw the idea inside the movement of the verse, and not as I expected as a sort of descriptive commentary on it. May lack Shay with me. In Genesis, Bereshit, of the Torah, God said let there be light, but he is not mentioned that he called it light, or named it such, but that it already had a name. The first time he invented something, if light was not an invention, which he called it a name, was the kind of light which he called day, then the darkness, night. The firmament was called heaven, and the dry land earth, while he called the weather seas. If you combine the waters and the seas, I suppose this could have a name, but it was not written as a planet back then, so the whole globe was not called Earth, like we do today. Everything he calls by a new name, there almost always is the connection with it being good. Other than playing with the names of the men and women in the Bible, God stops his naming there, just as he stopped naming things after the sixth day of creation, when he rested from his work of element creation. Perhaps forever. Malak Kabbalah with me. What Keats said, I take it to mean, coherence is beauty, and beauty. Coherence, that is all ye know on earth, and all ye need to know. Malak Elaine with me. I have a question. In his book Jesus and Yahweh, the names divine, critic Harold Bloom points out that there is a great variety of different Jesuses in the Greek New Testament. They are different, and at times incompatible with each other, he argues, because of different personality types in the Gospels. He counts at least 7 different Jesus Christs. Now for my question. In the Gospel of St. Mark in 13:6, Jesus says, "For many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many." All right, but in the Gospel of Matthew at 24:23-24, it is written that Jesus said, "Then if any man shall say unto you, Lo, here is Christ, or there, believe it not. For there shall arise false Christs, and false prophets, and shall shew great signs and wonders, insomuch that, if it were possible, they shall deceive the very elect." So having this version, my question is, does one Christ from a gospel cancel out the other, being that they are different sorts? Bloom does not read the Gospels as a continuity. My other questions are, why is Jesus mad? Either one? And why does it matter for there to be no other Jesuses? According to these Jesuses? Malak Donna with me. I have heard that Montaigne had said some things about Jesus, but cannot recall anything by memory. I like very much his Socrates, even though I give Plato the blame for ruining many things for the poets. Since Emerson is very much like Montaigne, I believe you, being that Emerson had much to say about both Jesus and Montaigne. One thing I forgot to add was that any little bit of nature which I find beautiful gets swallowed up in each of the Gospels by the overwhelming personalities of the Redeemer of so many people. But as Habermas has suggested, the thoughts of this world for the apostles were much less important than turning away from it. As I was reading the Greek New Testament tonight, thinking of Bloom's book, I wished I could tell why, if it is true that the apostles were at that time living in end times, why it was prophesied and warned against there being multiple Jesuses. The only way to connect the books together is if you read them as tools to convert, which is not the Bloomian readerly way of taking them each on their individual separate reading. Freud has said that we cannot escape ourselves internally, and that every belief we have is internal, which meant to him that the way we feel is generated from within, and though people may or may not be blamed for what they do, that how we take it is an internal process. Being so, if we can change things internally, there is no need to get upset at those who are guilty or innocent whom we sometimes blame for things. It is healthier, he suggests, not to complain. Malak Thrickbut with me. Beatrice was never wooed nor courted by Dante, but he loved her sufficiently after she died that she as an angel sent for him to be with her in heaven in his Divine Comedy. Malak Jennifer with me. From Act 1, Scene 1 of Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra. Philo, nay, but this dotage of our generals o'erflows the measure, those his goodly eyes that o'er the files and musters of the war have glowed like plated Mars, now bend, now turn the office and devotion of their view upon a tawny front, his captain's heart, which in the scuffles of great fights hath burst the buckles on his breast, reneges all temper, and is become the bellows and the fan To cool a gypsy's lust. Flourish. Enter Antony, Cleopatra, her ladies, the train, with eunuchs fanning her. Look, where they come. Take but good note, and you shall see in him the triple pillar of the world transformed into a strumpet's fool. Behold and see. In the passage quoted above I will use a part of it for my commentary. Two people, or characters, are all that's needed to make a community. However, those two can develop into larger communities with similar interests at times. In the start to the play here, Philo and Demetrius, friends of Antony, are gossiping about Antony and his lover Cleopatra, and predicting more foolishness from them. Therefore, their interests of their little community begin with a sort of gossip. When Antony, Cleopatra, her ladies, the train, eunuchs, and a messenger come onto the stage with their own community, it is one interested in pleasures. They leave again Philo and Demetrius to gossip more as they discuss what the consequences of Antony's foolishness will have upon Caesar. This is the only instance when these two characters are on stage in the play. Now one might think that gossip is what the primary interests of their group is concerned with, but I want to argue that it is mostly the vocabulary choices they use, which are behind their gossiping. Out of this speech, I noticed that some of their poetic interests match mine, while others don't. The words from the vocabulary which I can use and relate to, because these things are on my mind and I use them in writing, are as follows. Overflows, measure, goodly, eyes, glowed, now, bend, turn, devotion. View, tawny, iffy, front, heart, great, fights, burst, fan, cool, note, pillar. This word would be welcome to my vocabulary since using it recently I want to keep it, world, transformed, and fool. These words connect my interests with the interests of that small two-person group in a way such that I can talk with them about these subjects, views, hearts, the world, etc., because I end up thinking about these words often. So we have a common ground, only I am not good at gossiping, but this doesn't matter. Should I ever have found myself in their group, I could have picked up on their words, their interests which are their words, and launched forth my own concerns about such words, and my views on them. May lack Lisbeth with me. I noticed that when writing about Jonathan Edwards, William J. Wainwright mentioned Edwards' view that God creates to communicate his glory, the Cambridge Dictionary of Philosophy. I had the thought that communication must only be in a nice way for there to be any glory expressed, since terror and fear are not glories but horrors. There is also the other idea that God stopped creating long ago and abandoned his project. This is the reason why Nietzsche proclaimed that God is dead, but perhaps Edwards means the regeneration of the energies and objects of them in the universe with God's help is his glory. I like that Edwards was thinking about communication, but even my angels to whom I talk, though they are awesome, don't talk to earn my awe over their own glories. We talk to talk, just like people do, it is not much different. Malak Kelly with me. I know we must have a place to live, so if Edwards thought of it as God's way of communicating his glory to us, why is not this communication just plain communication? Is it the case that God won't talk to us directly and so he makes our world? If so, why? In his chapter on Romeo and Juliet, speaking of the thing to cure the hatred of the two families for each other, Goddard remarks, now, there is just one agency powerful enough in youth to defy and cut across domination of the generations, and that is love. He omitted the domination of the hatred of the generations, or by domination he meant hatred, which was the feud of the families. In order for there to be any chance for love to grow again, there must be new generations of families, since between the Montagues and the Capulets all else is impossible, no friendliness nor compromise. It seems a little sad that love as a remedy to the illness of hate should have to be the only cure. Love is not even freely chosen, since we cannot choose with whom we fall in love. Therefore, it is due to fate, the stars, and not to any freedom of choice that the two enemy families will mend their faults, yet it takes a tragedy to do so. Malak Kelly with me. The great critic, Harold C. Goddard says in his chapter on Romeo and Juliet that there is poetry, deep down, even in Capulet. I would say that although on the surface there is difficulty in Juliet's father, Capulet, he seems to me more moved into poetry as a reactionary than as one who generates it naturally, since his poetical heights come after Juliet's supposed death on her wedding day, which he arranged for her in the county Paris. That Goddard said such I am grateful. Although I think that the poetry is not a norm of his, Juliet's father, in this way, since it takes a great loss for him to achieve its heights, which, if deep down, to get to the surface would indeed be a greater height than it was. Poets as inventors must create by wishing their vision into reality, not so much by having it come as if not from oneself. A poem that just happens is something that is a feeling but not an act of willing invention, which is what I believe poetry to be. Malak Elaine with me. Harold C. Goddard remarks that Richard II of Shakespeare is a man who keeps playing king until he is deposed. I think, however, he still plays a king afterwards too, just not the King of England, since Richard II thinks of himself as another sort of Christ. Malak Shea with me. From Harold C. Goddard's The Meaning of Shakespeare. What devil was 't that thus hath cozened you at the hoodman blind? From these words of Hamlet to Gertrude, Goddard says that, by condemning her, Hamlet's mother, he, Hamlet, is condemning himself. This was the scene of Polonius' murder, where Hamlet kills him as he is eavesdropping behind a curtain. Hamlet speaks this line above to his mother. Cozened means cheated or deceived. Hoodman blind just means blindfolded, since Polonius was wrapped in a curtain, he couldn't see them. Gertrude in Hamlet's eyes has been deceived too, because he feels she was blinded into marrying Claudius, whom he refers to as that devil. Hamlet too, suggests Goddard, is also blinded into believing that Gertrude has been deceived, since there is a good chance Gertrude knew everything about what she was doing when she married Claudius. Hamlet is upset and takes it out on his mother, and by blaming her, Goddard suggests that Hamlet is also blaming himself, or using her as a projection of his own blame on himself. After all, he killed Polonius, perhaps mistaking him for the king. But all in all, Hamlet has blood on his hands, and must have some guilt which feels unbearable, in addition to the feeling of betrayal which he had after his mother remarried. Yet, as Freud points out, we cannot blame others, we cannot condemn them, since all feelings we have are reactions from our experiences within us, which are complex and almost always subjective. Malak Kelly with me. 1. To steal away from the voice of words is a kind of neglect. 2. An author brings to bloom a sweetness on a page. 3. Readers pour themselves upon that page to nourish what is expressed. 4. Each word is like a celestial star hovering to be interpreted. 5. Natural moods develop personalities as fits with this growing grass of their truth interpreted on the page by the reader. 6. Words look wild if the reader reads them without attention to the voice of the author. 7. The spirit of personality reigns at home in the sounds of words. 8. A catalogue of personalities of the words on a page wins the world on the margin of its page. 9. The river of language turns its sequence over a page. 10. A reader rushes lost in language when sound and sense are not linked together. 11. Wind leaves the space of one mood to the mood of another word when spoken aloud. 12. Sound frees words for their truths. 13. The palace of a page closes the reader off from its treasures when the reader neglects the mood of the words. 14. With the loss of the personality of words, the reader descends into dream play. 15. A silence holds in the ruin of language when sense is separated from sound. Malak Amy with me. I started early, took my dog, Dickinson. In an auditory way, the music in the brain or in the ear of the word I is to the mood of started, as the melody of I started is to the mood of early. There is something logical to speak of moods, but also religious or spiritual, since the word, the davar, word in Hebrew, also means to bring forth action. You might even think of early as phenomenological, not as of a shape, i.e. seeing its letters, but of its natural sound. Does early not sound different than late, or even fresh for that matter? I and thou have different moods too. The construction of a chain of words follows like this. 1. I has the personality when spoken of started, or to start. 2. I started has the mood of early, or earliness when spoken. 3. I started early sounds as if something took out. 4. I started early, took has a personal, my sound. 5. And finally, I started early, took my connects with dog in a way that one may think of dogs, not so much their barking, but their friendliness or behavior. This is figurative. That whole phrase I started early, took my dog, is explained in the mood of the beginning words of the second line following it, from the way that first line is spoken, how it sounds. And visited the sea. The first line seems to sound as if it is a visitor. This is one possible way to read, which I am exploring for fun. Malak Donna with me. A little on Shelley's poem Ozymandias. It is conversational and direct to begin saying, I met a traveler from an antique land. Something is expressed about the traveling which seems to me to be a mistake. This speaker takes a stance. Who said, 2 vast and trunkless legs of stone. There is a sort of despair in the line. Stand in the desert, near the sand. With a sense of aging and deep decay in the next. Half sunk a shattered visage lies, whose frown. Then comes the act of explaining. And wrinkled lip, and sneer of cold command. With attention to the lengthening of time. Tell that its sculptor well those passions read. And some feeling of healthy jest to say. Which yet survive, stamped on those lifeless things. A presence is expressed in the personality. The hand that mocked them, and the heart that fed. The next line is descriptive in the way it sounds. And on the pedestal, these words appear. There is a revealing in the next sounding line. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. And a feeling of eternity in the one following it. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. There is sadness resumed. Nothing besides remains. Round the decay. A solitude of the sound in this line. Of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare. And a joyful secret in the sound of the last. The lone and level sands stretch far away. Malak Shay with me. If Eden counts as paradise, then there are 2 paradises lost, Eve's and Adam's, from Eden, and Satan's from the kingdom of heaven, though there is the sequel paradise regained, so Milton must be talking about the usual one, heaven. Milton does not say much about paradise, even though it is in the title. He does however call it a place of happy realms of light, so it is both happy and a realm of light. Some place else later. In his epic he links heaven with liberty. Happiness, freedom, and light are ruled over by a god, whom is unfortunately tyrannical. In his book On Milton's God, called Milton's God, a book by William Empson, whom I had long forgot that I had read a book by him, but it comes to me now. In the book Empson says how God caused all the trouble in the first place. The hidden God is the Holy Spirit, which is the narrative drive of the poem, and neither Jesus nor God himself, Jehovah. If then the real God is the reader's and Milton's muse of reading, that spirit of the inner light, then my question is, where is heaven then? Is there a hidden heaven just like there is a hidden God, or is the narrator's voice also dwelling in the happy realms of light, where it has liberty, being that it is happy and free? If there is a hidden heaven, is that the paradise which was lost, and not the one of the tyrannical God and Jesus? Malak Teresa with me. Liberals like myself are against cruelty, and cruelty is the worst thing we can do to each other, says Judith Sklar. And being that cruelty is made up of 2 components, pain and humiliation, pain is more difficult to treat worldwide than humiliation. The reason is that pains are more complex. Humiliation can be beaten by being members of communities Who achieve solidarity, or who at least achieve the hope for solidarity. Feeling part of the group, even if this hope is delusive, at least it wards off humiliation if delusive, though it does not have to be. Yet, pains cannot be always counteracted with pleasure. Nietzsche spoke of the two, pain and pleasure, as not opposites, but that pain was forever allied to our memories. May lack honey with me. I suppose my original motive that underlies my own working toward the goal of making the MOAT project is to ward off a humiliation which I experienced, which when working with my angels, they did not cause the humiliation. Towards that goal, I felt I knew I was doing something important. But now that I look back, it was the being in a team and being guided which eliminated the humiliation, and not so much the content of the project per se. I wonder if I need to make more errors. Seriously. Nietzsche said that error is necessary for life, and of course I could always use a better life, as we all could. So how should I make errors in my quest? May lack Kelly with me. Emily Dickinson's poem, 1108, My Feelings. I think of a hot dry day and the commotion which those living in it make. The bustle in a house. Then I feel as if something is folding up. The morning after death. There is a sort of rising and falling next. Is solemnest of industries. Then an intense figuring out. Enacted pan earth. She makes an effort at the sweeping up the heart. And she is happier. And putting love away. By an understood use. We shall not want to use again. Until she feels a reconciliation. Until eternity. On the Portent. By Herman Melville. The title, The Portent, refers to divisions. Right and wrong, and justice and injustice. The first line I imagine at early dawn. There is a sense of a new death. Which is the early freshness of being hanged. Hanging from the beam. A patience is expressed since something has occurred and is now over. In the second line. Slowly swaying, such the law. With the third line, I feel a sense that what has happened is undesired. Its imagery is undesirable. Gaunt the shadow on your green. This leads to the yell, Shenandoah. A dullness of death is found in the cut is on the crown. And there is certainty in naming the victim. Lo, John Brown. This leads to the unpleasant, and the stabs shall heal no more. Secrets are permitted, hidden in the cap. And, it is a calm realization, is the anguish none can draw. In which I hear tears, so your future veils its face. And then the weird yell again, Shenandoah. Things turn distant, but the streaming beard is shown. And the speaker becomes a sort of prophet, weird John Brown. As there is action in recalling, the meteor of the war. May lack Jennifer with me. Finishing up a rereading of Harold Bloom's Jesus and Yahweh, the names divine, book filled with goodness, I think of the reason for the despair of Jesus as one which happened because he himself was not willing to change, or was blocked from changing. In either case, I think despair can be separated from a general sadness. There are many things we ourselves cannot change, but some of the things we can change. At times we are reluctant to change because something that worked once is now broken, and we think we can fix it, and so we don't wish to believe in other more healthy alternatives, like not trying to fix what once was our source of joy. To cope can be hard at times, but it beats the feeling of failing at doing the impossible. May lack Kelly with me. The way of interpreting which I am picking up from Harold Bloom. It is this, to read aloud the line or passage and based off of the mood of the personality of the phrases, describe that mood the best way that you can. Interpretation relies on helpers, adjectives, and adverbs to give a view of what was just spoken aloud. But if your ear is trained, well, I suppose thinking the line and commenting on its tone works just as well. I would give examples, but I have been practicing this method much of this week already in my posts. I hope that this reading of Harold Bloom's method is and proves useful for some readers. May lack Jennifer with me. I always feel a little worried, though my worry is mixed with some pleasantness, when Ulysses, Ajax, and Phoenix attempt to convince Achilles to rejoin the Trojan War. Malak Jennifer with me. As someone who favors peace, the name Israel or in Hebrew, Yisroel, harrows me. It means God goes to war. Why did Jacob get this new name? And, where does God go to war? I myself feel Milton gave an answer to the latter, that God goes to war in heaven, and heaven only, since the brightest of the angels, Lucifer, did not conform to the rule set by God that all knees should bend for his only Son. Milton has Lucifer and 1/3 of the angels fight the rest until Jesus Christ is victorious and sends the 1/3 to hell. This, I think, Milton's version is the war God goes on, with the Son in charge versus the accuser or Satan. Satan means the accuser in Hebrew. Malak Shnuna with me. I am most certain that Jesus Christ would find his own name harrowing and hate the sound of it. If he hates his name, I suppose that he would want everyone else to hate it too, right? Malak Shay with me. Sophocles in his triple tragedies, the Theban plays, writes with characters always striving against time, as if the plot of time was something to worship. We fear time, but they worked with it not knowing, or at least hoping, that fortune would still be on their side. It might not be the rush of time, but the idea that Sophocles made his characters victims of the curse of fate is to say that they prioritized success of fortune over weakness of merely being human. Alexander Pope said that to err is human, to forgive, divine, but this is not Sophocles' wisdom. His wisdom is sort of the kind which many tragedies produce, which is not to do what Oedipus or Antigone perhaps does. Yet, they play the game of fortune, which Pope may have seen as a game of dunces, I think. If Oedipus had not been on a sort of time schedule, playing a game of deadlines, maybe he would have understood that he too was only human, and not have been so hard on himself. Malak Kelly with me. I have seen more often than not that within the poems of John Keats, there is a tendency to use many adjectives to describe nouns, but most of the nouns he describes with helpers are found not in the subject of the poem but in its object and prepositions. One would think that this is a diversionary technique to help attain the lulling effect of most of his poetry, taking away our attention from the center of description to a new center of calm storyishness. His lyrics have the majority of description set aside for the art of telling, or of foretelling. There is more description, and he is a master at using adjectives, but still these are not as important as the lull and dreamy effect of his visions. Malak Honey with me. I see how James Joyce's Finnegan's Wake was created in the same spirit of Tristram Shandy. There is a sort of explosion of something other than delight, but almost just as good in the language of the wake, which I call satisfaction of the speaker/author. Surely after writing his masterpiece, Ulysses, Finnegan's Wake, in that wake, is directed to an audience he knows will read him, yet, the zaniness which ensues is carried up to high art, since Joyce knew he could get away with verging on gibberish if that gibberish was comic and inventive. The power in its newness lies, I feel, in the wake's ability to speak out, but it speaks as if the speaker is not really being heard. By becoming perhaps frustrated that one's speech is not being heard, creative development occurs and the speaker in the book attains a freedom to say things, even as he feels that he is not ever being listened to, and thus comes more creativity, in a modern sort of way. The repetition of puns and phrases only repeats in its process of discovery, but always leads to more new discovery of saying things, even though no one seems to care to be listening. I also see that Joyce makes much use of the letters at the beginning of the English alphabet for the first letters of his words more often than not. Malak Honey with me. John Ruskin wrote a book on reading and art called Sesame and Lilies. In it he talks about only reading great books, and of course the importance of reading in general. Ruskin in it appears to be possessed by three authors in particular, Shakespeare, Milton, and the writer of passages of the Bible, which were many authors, but forgive me, I noticed that with Milton, he takes a look at Milton's poem/elegy, Lycidas, and I realized that when he speaks of Milton's poetry, he reifies the language of the poet so as to make him look like he is not only writing poetry but also making a sort of art,